The chill of the tarmac in Sydney hit him first, a stark contrast to the oppressive heat of the detention centre they'd just left. But it was the screams, the memories of forced strip searches and the echoing slaps across faces that truly clung to them. Imagine stepping off a plane back onto Australian soil knowing that the journey home was only the beginning of another far more insidious battle, the fight for a fair go, for accountability and for justice after alleged human rights abuses in a foreign land. This wasn't just a story about a trip gone wrong, it was about what happens when Australians, believing in a humanitarian cause, find themselves caught in a geopolitical storm and return home with allegations that shake the very foundations of international law and our own expectations of protection. Before this nightmare unfolded, the 11 Australians at the heart of our story were just ordinary people from across the country. There was Dr. Sarah Al-Majid, a GP from Brunswick in Melbourne known for her tireless work in community health clinics. A woman whose calm demeanour usually belied a fierce commitment to human dignity. Then there was David O'Connell, a retired schoolteacher from the Central Coast of New South Wales, who had spent his life instilling values of compassion in his students. Now driven by a similar desire to help those less fortunate. From Perth we had the quietly determined engineer Liam Davies, and from Brisbane's outer rings the vibrant student activist Chloe Nguyen, whose idealism was as palpable as the Queensland humidity. They were unionists, academics, small business owners, all united by a single powerful conviction to deliver humanitarian aid to Gaza, a region facing immense hardship. They weren't seasoned diplomats or political operatives, they were everyday Australians responding to a global call for assistance. Their lives before May of 2026 were filled with the usual Australian rhythms: weekends at the beach, backyard barbecues, the daily grind of work, and the quiet comfort of their communities. They believed in the power of peaceful protest and the fundamental human right to provide aid. They understood the risks perhaps, but never truly anticipated the horrific reality that awaited them far from the red dust of regional Queensland or the quiet dignity of Hobart. The incident itself began with a clear stated mission to join the global Sumud Flotilla, a collection of vessels carrying humanitarian aid destined for Gaza. Their aim, they maintained, was purely altruistic: to break a blockade and deliver essential supplies to a besieged population. On board one of these ships as they navigated international waters, the Australians prepared for what they hoped would be a peaceful delivery. But the ocean calm shattered on May 25 when Israeli naval forces intercepted their vessel. What followed, according to the activists, was a terrifying ordeal. They alleged that they were forcibly boarded in international waters, an act they contend was a violation of international law. The initial confrontation escalated rapidly. Passengers, including the Australians, were detained, but the allegations went far beyond simple detention. Once taken into Israeli custody, the activists claim they were subjected to a litany of abuses. Drive Al-Majid and Chloe Nguyen, among others, alleged they were subjected to forced strip searches, described as demeaning and utterly without justification, in violation of their basic human rights and dignity. David O'Connell spoke of being physically assaulted, beaten by guards. Liam Davies recounted being held in cramped, unsanitary conditions, denied adequate medical care, and subjected to prolonged periods of interrogation and psychological intimidation. They spoke of being stripped naked, of being beaten, and of enduring a deliberate campaign of dehumanization. Their phones and personal belongings were confiscated. Communication with the outside world, and crucially with Australian consular officials, was severely restricted if not outright denied for significant periods. These weren't isolated incidents they claimed but a pattern of behavior designed to break their spirit and silence their voices. The activists were held for several days, an experience they described as a living hell before eventually being deported back to Australia. The precise details of each alleged assault, the specific times, the names of those involved, these were the details they carried etched onto their memory, ready to be presented. If only someone would listen. Upon their return, landing at Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane airports to crowds of supporters, the immediate challenge was navigating the aftermath of trauma and the complex legal landscape that lay ahead. The priority for the activists and their legal representatives was to formally document their allegations of sexual assault, torture and degrading treatment. This wasn't a matter for VCAT or NCAT, which handle local disputes like tenancy disagreements under the Residential Tenancies Act, or consumer complaints under the Australian Consumer Law. This was a matter of international human rights and potential criminal conduct. Their Australian legal team began exploring avenues for redress both domestically and internationally. They knew that prosecuting a foreign government or its agents in an Australian court for actions taken overseas presents immense jurisdictional hurdles. However, the first step was to seek a meeting with the Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese to press for an official response from the Australian government. They wanted the government to demand accountability from Israel and to offer support to its citizens who had allegedly suffered such egregious abuses. The allegations, particularly those of sexual assault, also raised the prospect of reporting these incidents to Australian law enforcement, though the question of jurisdiction remained a significant barrier to any domestic prosecution. Simultaneously, their lawyers were looking at potential complaints to international bodies such as the United Nations Human Rights Committee, which could investigate violations of international human rights treaties. The challenge was immense, gathering verifiable evidence from a foreign jurisdiction, navigating diplomatic complexities, and confronting the often slow and bureaucratic processes of international justice. What was at stake wasn't just compensation for their suffering but the principle that Australians, wherever they are in the world, should be protected from such abuses, and that perpetrators, regardless of their uniform or nationality, should face justice. The question lingered: would their voices echoing from the tarmac of Sydney be loud enough to truly be heard on the global stage? The resolution of this particular chapter for the 11 Australian activists was not a neat, definitive courtroom victory with a clear dollar figure attached. Instead, it was a complex ongoing struggle. The immediate outcome was their safe, albeit traumatized, return to Australian soil. They achieved their goal of raising public awareness both in Australia and internationally about the conditions in Gaza and the alleged treatment of activists. Their press conferences, supported by organizations advocating for human rights, ensured that their allegations of forced strip searches, beatings, and degrading treatment were widely reported by Australian media. This put immense pressure on the Australian government to respond. While there was no immediate public commitment from the Prime Minister to meet with them, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade (DFAT) confirmed they were providing consular assistance, a standard but crucial step. The diplomatic channels between Australia and Israel were undoubtedly engaged, albeit behind closed doors. For the activists themselves, the most tangible outcome so far has been the support network they found amongst themselves and from their communities, along with access to trauma counseling and legal advice. There has been no criminal prosecution in Australia of any Israeli officials nor any widely publicized international tribunal ruling directly on their specific cases. The journey for justice is long and arduous. It's not a clear-cut win but rather an ongoing battle